Perfect. Well, thank you,
Sounds good.
Abigail. Sorry about the switcheroo from the live, but we're still so excited to ask all these questions. We got a lot of good feedback from the episode
Oh,
already.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, and tons of questions. So, should we start with a quick introduction for people who haven't listened to the episode, and then we'll get right into the questions?
Sounds perfect.
Perfect. So can you just introduce yourself, what you
Oh,
do?
I'm introducing. Oh,
Yes, you
I'm doing the
introduce.
introducing.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yes,
Hey
can you
there. I'm
introduce?
Avigail Gimpel. We're speaking from Israel right now, where I'm living. I'm a New Yorker. And I've got 6 amazing children. And it was my students and children that really took me down the path of deep diving into ADHD and figuring out what's going on with these incredibly bright, healthy children. And so my journey of 25 years was recently published in a book that you guys have been reading, and I love that. I so appreciate that. And I'm happy you're enjoying it. And I'm here to talk about all matters ADHD.
Yes. Yeah, we absolutely love the first book. I refer to it all the time. I have a few clients with ADD and ADHD who are really coming to me for routines. And I'm like, I have the Bible. So grateful for your book. And so grateful that you're doing a giveaway this week for our listeners. Definitely want to plug that. It's on our Instagram. So if you're watching this on YouTube, head to Instagram, enter in the giveaway. And my first question for you was when I was listening to the episode yesterday again, and you were talking about the importance of sleep and having your kids have a nighttime routine and the incentive chart and all the things. And I was like, gosh, I really should have asked her, what is her nighttime routine? What do you do to set yourself up for a good night's sleep?
Great question, which no one has ever asked me. I usually try to be in bed by 11.
Okay.
That's my target. And I don't really have a dramatic routine. I remember growing up, my best friend always had like all of these things she did before she went to bed. And I was amazed by that. Like, what are you doing? I just want to make sure that I had some relaxing time before I got into bed, conversation with my husband. Last night I had a fun conversation with one of my 5 brothers, and that put me in a good mood before I went to sleep. But otherwise, it's just, shower, brushing teeth, a little bit of calm. I try not to exercise right before bed because that's way too stimulating. So at least an hour and a half beforehand, I want to not do that. Try not to be on my phone too close to bedtime, but otherwise, kind of like a regular person.
Love that.
Yeah, that's always something I'm working on. Because I know sleep does impact my symptoms, but it's only so much we can do that right now. But I did kind of wanted to talk about some of the things from your second book that we didn't get a chance to touch on in the episode and kind of talk about the science side of ADHD. So I'm curious if you could maybe talk about some of the most interesting things you learned while doing the research for this book. I have more detailed questions, but I'm curious first, what was the most interesting things that you found?
Sure, absolutely. So here's the book right there next to me. I love the colors. Isn't that nice?
Oh, yeah.
Anyhow, the every single thing that I wrote in that book was a massive discovery because when I learned about ADHD in graduate school and then being coached on ADHD by my children's doctor, literally nothing that they told me is in the book because it turns out to not be correct, and that really shocked me because it turns out that the big thing they teach you in grad school is that they've absolutely identified this brain disorder and therefore we need to correct the brain disorder, and it turns out that they haven't identified it properly yet, and it's still in motion. They're still looking for it. And the biggest study in 2017 with thousands and thousands of kids, they found that only 5% of kids diagnosed with ADHD, not the control group, just the diagnosed kids, only 5% of them had something varied about their brain. Could they say it was disordered? No, they couldn't. Not only that, in the comparison group, they also found kids with variations of the brain. And for me, the mind-blowing moment is that most of the studies indicating that there's something wrong with a kid's brain or an adult's brain was based on scans of children's brains that had been medicated. So what are we looking at? Are we looking at something that's from birth? Are we looking perhaps at something that was caused by medication? We don't know, but that's not a reliable study. So I went through all the studies from the late 70s all the way through 2017. And there literally was not one reliable study that I could look at, double blind, placebo controlled, everything there, all not placebo because we're looking at scans. Right. So we don't know what we're looking at. And essentially, the researchers at the end of the studies were saying, we can't actually diagnose ADHD based on a brain scan. And why not? We can diagnose strep throat based on a swab of the throat because we can see it. If we can't see it still, let's look somewhere else because it doesn't seem to be there. But it very conveniently fits into the narrative that pharma's created, which is brain disorder, let's fix it. Now, I'm not anti-medication, but the bottom line for a mom, it was really important for me to hear, and for all of you out there, it's really important to hear your brain is healthy and intact. And there is the possibility that the drugs that they're using to treat your brain are what's causing the abnormalities that sometimes are seen.
Wow.
Is that crazy?
Wow.
That is wild.
That was literally going to be my next question about like, what do people's brains look like if they have that diagnosis versus not? But I guess then did you find what was different in the people's brains that were on medication versus not?
Sure. So all of these studies that will tell us definitively that there's something wrong with someone's brain are looking at the brains of someone that's been medicated 98% of the time. So that's might as well be 100. And so therefore the abnormalities that we're seeing, a smaller frontal lobe, different areas of the brain that have less neural pathways, things like that. There are 5 areas of the brain that have been, implicated in ADHD, but yet those areas are also being targeted by medication, by the pill that is being used to treat it. So, and we know that the mechanism of action of stimulant medications is meant to perturb the brain. And what it's doing is trapping the dopamine, which we're always talking about with ADHD. Something wrong with the dopamine. Is it something wrong with the dopamine, or did the medication create a dopamine problem? It's trapping the dopamine in the synapses and just having it keep fire for hours and hours and hours. So the person starts to hyperfocus. The stuff works. It's solid. But if you're trapping that dopamine in the synapses, your body's not going to be producing more dopamine. And therefore, because your body's always looking for balance, a homeostasis. So therefore, if it's not producing more dopamine, you don't need any more. The body's not going to produce excess dopamine waiting online to get into the brain. And so over time, you land up with less dopamine production. So is that something the child was born with? Not according to understanding of what stimulant medications do. So we kind of like, it's an Occam razor kind of thing. Like we have to look at the most obvious reason why this could be happening.
So full disclosure, in the intro of the episode, I talk about how in college I would take other people's medication to study or pull an all-nighter. Definitely don't recommend to anyone watching this Q&A, but I did do that. And I have never felt more depressed in my entire life. And I'm sure that there were many other factors that played into that. But like when you were saying this of like, okay, my body is learning, oh, I'm getting dopamine from this thing. I don't need to produce it as much. I'm like, I wonder if that played a role in that, especially since I was not taking a dose for me. I'm sure it all, went into that. So I'm curious, like what you have seen working with clients, who are trying to get off of medication. Have you had to work on like getting the body back to producing those neurotransmitters of dopamine and finding other things that brings them, you know, a dopamine influx? Like, what do you do when you see that?
Well, God has made our body brilliantly, and
Yeah.
I don't have to help the body start producing more dopamine. What I do have to do is help the person manage until the body gets that message that it's time to start stimulating more dopamine, which takes about a month. So within that month, I'm going to be very supportive. I'm going to make sure the person's eating healthy and getting plenty of rest and having, and these are the things that are vital. You have to be taking care of yourself physically. You have to have a support system. You can't do it without a support system. And you also have to be getting exercise. So they always make sure that before a person starts tapering and getting off, and this is also for all psychiatric drugs, that they have people that can handle the rages or the depression, and not say to them, oh, this means since you're depressed or you're raging or you're angry, you're out of control, this means you got to get back on the medication. A support system that understands that the brain takes at least a month to readjust. And I know this happened with my son when I took him off of Ritalin in it was 5th grade, and I kept calling, the teacher kept calling me frantic. It's, you know, he needs the medication. He needs the medication. He's just going crazy here. And I kept saying to him, do you remember we discussed this? It's going to be a month. And after a month, he came back to himself. Was he back to like a calm student? No, he never was a calm student. But he was back to a good kid that wanted to learn, that needed help with habits.
Wow. I mean, that must have been tough having to hear that from the teachers constantly. Like, I'm glad he stood your ground, but that must be really a tough battle to fight there.
Yeah, and it took me like I'm talking about my 4th child. So it took me a while to get up the confidence to say I know what I'm doing, and that's why I wrote the book, because it took me way too long to get this information. Parents should be getting this information with the diagnosis. This is a diagnosis. These are our options, and please read all the options and learn about them and get proper informed consent before you put anything in your kid's mouth or choose any intervention program.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's nice to hear, because I'm still on the medication, but I decided this summer is when I'm going to go off in less than 6 months. So it's nice to hear that it's like that 1 month push. Honestly,
well, we should talk. I'll help you out.
Okay, yeah, I'm definitely gonna need some help there.
I'm on your team.
Appreciate it. Yeah, because I'm like, I need to find time when I know I'm gonna have to sleep a lot more than normal, and I'm gonna have to make sure the stress levels are down and work is calmer and whatnot.
Right.
But that's interesting, especially with kids. That must have been difficult to manage. But do you have any sort of like, do you like prescribe either supplements to help as well, or is it mostly just like the food and the habits and just really getting the body to return back to homeostasis?
So in my first book, I have a full chapter on diet called the 30-Day Challenge.
Yep.
And there are a bunch of things I recommend, although I don't put all kids on the 30-Day Challenge or their families or adults. I mean, you should go for it. You should totally do it. And just because it's for an adult, it's not a big deal. But when you have little kids, you really have to be discerning. You have to look at, are you seeing physiological symptoms? Does the kid always have a runny nose, or it doesn't sleep well, or stomach aches, headaches, asthma, allergies, all that stuff? You want it, or a kid was born by C-section, not nursed. Not blaming the parents, the moms specifically. Never blame the moms. But we work way too hard to be blamed. But the point is that you want to be, if you're seeing any of those symptoms, including, by the way, psychiatric symptoms like depression, anxiety. So all of those, if I see any of that, I'm going straight to the 30-Day Challenge. So I'm taking out a bunch of foods like gluten, dairy, food additives, food coloring, trying to reduce sugar, things like that. There's a bunch of things we're reducing, and there are a bunch of things I'm adding. One major go-to is probiotics. And I like the probiotics. There's 2 that I particularly like. One is made by Dr. David Perlmutter, who I really admire. The other one is from a brand called Hardy. None of them pay me. So just letting you know, this is stuff that I have found after trying a million of them. But the Hardy one is great because it has like the prebiotic, probiotic together, which is excellent. So that's right away. That's my first recommendation. You could also use probiotic foods. So you have farmers markets that make all of these fermented foods. I like that better than taking a pill, but kids don't like it. Adults do like it. I love it and eat it all the time. Besides for that, if kids or adults are having any kind of problem with very dry skin or sleep issues or constipation, I'm going straight to magnesium. We always have to check the B levels and the D levels. That's a blood test. Magnesium, we don't have to check in the blood because we don't get a proper read of it anyway. But D's got to be over 50. That's also for COVID, by the way. Just any diseases you're going to get more colds, you're going to be more sick if your D levels dip below 50. And so those are standard. The one thing that I do like that I recommend to adults more, because adults can handle it, because it's a little bit of has a little bit of an aftertaste, is a micronutrient also made by Hardy. There's a women's one, there's a men's one, there's a multi one, and that when I put adults on that, the most remarkable results have really been seen over and over again. People with depression have reduced or stopped taking the medication for depression. People have started waking up in the morning, getting their day started. You have to take, the reason it's hard for kids is because you have to take between 8 and 12 pills a day, because you're really flooding your system. Totally, Melissa, you got to take this stuff. It's fantastic. I've got it in the book too, and you'll love it. You'll see that it gives you everything you need, the energy, the positivity, and the focus. So that's a big one. And there are also peer-reviewed studies done on it. Most of these vitamin companies, they do studies on their own vitamins, and they're always positive, which is amazing. It's kind of like the pharmaceutical companies. They also do a lot of studies on their own stuff. But here, this was outside reviewed and comparing different micronutrients, and this one came out ahead. And for a good reason. It really works.
Wow, I wrote that down.
And they should hire me.
I think they should.
Yeah, you need to be an affiliate. You need to be a partner with them really quick.
Actually, interestingly, if you put at checkout, if you put my last name, Gimpel, in a checkout, you get a 10% discount. I don't get anything for that. I put my own name in when I check out. Just because I called them one day and I said, hey guys, I'm sending a lot of people to you. Be nice to my clients. And they said, okay. And so that's for anyone who wants.
Good to know.
Yeah, that's awesome. Why I'm curious too, because like I said, on the live before we joined on Zoom, I was saying that last night my boyfriend and I ordered your second book. He had has ADD, and went off medication a couple of years ago and has been, just trying to do the best that he can. So he really loved your episode, and we were like, well, we need the second book. So planning to read it together. Any other tips that are in your second book that we should be looking out for to help with either people who have gone off medication or are aspiring to go off and need a little motivation or need a little support?
So there's two things that I highly recommend. First of all, taper. Do not pull the plug. Terrible idea. Get a couple of prescriptions so that you can go down. And every few days, not every day, and that will give you a smoother landing. That's not something I did for that particular son that I'm talking about, but other children got treated to that because I learned it later. That's one. And number two is you want to also be creating habits before you pull the medication, you want to have a couple of things in order. You want to already have some routines in order so that you don't feel like everything is frazzled and you kind of get lost along the way. So really take care of yourself as you're doing it. And also again, so there's the eating healthy, there's the making sure that your body is nourished. Our bodies are brilliant and they're going to help us do what we need to do, but we have to work together. I always tell people, our body is not the thing that carries our brain around. Our body, it's like a full system, and we have to work with it together. So the second book is not as much a how-to. It's more of, you need this information before you do anything, and it goes through every single pill. And the pills that with it, every year new pills come out. So I go through every group and really explain what it does in the brain, what it does in the body, short term, long term. And interestingly, this was another major find, was that people who take medication long term, more than a year, tend to be worse off in long term than people who have taken it for a shorter amount of time or haven't taken it at all. And there's a lot of explanations for it, but it's just a very interesting piece of information. So using the medication here and there for a test is something that's okay. It's, if you have a big week at work, okay, so you need an extra boost. That's all right. We also drink coffee, and sometimes we drink too much coffee. So it's, similar to that in that way. But for the long-term use, the outcomes are worse for people who are taking it every single day for over 3 years than people who have stopped taking it.
Interesting. Okay. I really got to do a deep dive in this book now. Figure out the whys here. So I'm curious. This is actually a question from my mom. What are your thoughts on because she also has ADD and ADHD, and she was like, what are your thoughts on ADHD symptoms getting worse when women go through menopause? And does that have to do with the hormones, or is it just like relearning habits or something like that?
So I wish I could give your mother a really, really educated response to that, but I don't know. I don't know. I know that the whole body starts to rage with menopause, according to information I'm being given. But so everything gets knocked out of whack. I have a lot of friends who are not diagnosed with ADHD who tell me that as they're going through menopause, they feel less focused. That must be related, but I don't know if it's necessarily ADHD symptoms, or I don't know.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I'm going to look it up though. Now that you've asked me, I'm going to have to find out.
Yeah. I'm curious what you find out. Let me know.
Sure.
When you were saying that people who are on medication long-term are worse off, I know that at the start of this little Q&A, we were talking about the brain scans and what you were seeing in the brain scans. Like, what specifically is the research showing are the long-term impacts of some of these medications?
So the more, and you and your boyfriend will be reading this very soon. What I found appalling was that 1 in 10 people who take these stimulant medications for over a year will land up with a secondary psychiatric condition. And that also blew my mind. And as someone who works with ADHD every day, all day, I have a good number of clients who landed up suddenly with bipolar and all sorts of chronic depression and things like that, which is devastating and lands you being a patient for life. And in the comparison group, they did not find that same outcome.
Wow. That's sad.
Yeah. And in real life, I look around my neighborhood and I know which kids have taken stimulants because the parents always sit right next to me on the park bench when I'm trying to play with my kids in the park. And so I know exactly who's taking medication. And it is true. It is one after the next. I know which kids landed up in psychiatric hospitals and which kids landed up with other conditions. And that's about 1 in 10.
So when that happens and they go off the ADD medication, do you have other things that you do to help support the other psychiatric disorders if they are if they are diagnosed with that, or is it mostly just getting them to manage their ADHD symptoms and getting them healthier, and then hopefully they can find other help with that?
Well, there was a great study just recently came out that showed that exercise is regular exercise is more effective than any antidepressants, any SSRIs. So I'm generally not going to go in the direction of medication, certainly not for children. And it hasn't been tested on children under 18 anyway. And we know that there's a suicidal ideation associated with a lot of these. So the kid's already struggling. I don't really need to add the suicidal part, God forbid, that's awful. So in general, I'm not going, just because it's a diagnosis doesn't mean that there's a pill to fit. A pill for every ill, as they say. It means that we have to figure out what's going on for the kid. And manage is not a word that I like to use. It's more of intervention. Why is this going on? The brain can heal itself. And therefore, I'm going to support the brain with nutrients and the body with exercise and the soul with support. And in most cases, the person will be able to pull through.
I love that. That's so great. And I love a mind, body, spirit approach to health and wellness, because it's so true. All of those aspects need to be nourished for you to feel well, not even if you are somebody who has been diagnosed with anything. Like, all of those aspects need to be nourished. And yeah, it's just crazy what you're finding. And on, the other side of the coin, now I'm just curious, like, scientifically, I know you were talking about how ADD and ADHD medication helps with those dopamine synapses and, creating that influx so you're motivated and all that stuff. But have you found any other research that shows how prescription medications for these two disorders actually helps children? Because I know you said that there's a place for medication and maybe you don't recommend it for long-term use, but short-term, what are there other benefits aside from what you just mentioned earlier?
So I see medication, or again, I have a hard time calling it medication because in my mind, a medication heals, and this doesn't heal, but there is a place for it, and the place for it is as a bandage, a plaster, a band-aid for whatever part of the world we're from, and that is like the child is really bleeding, or the adult is really bleeding. Work's not going well, relationships are not going well, everyone's against you, there's a negativity, you're not passing tests, it's just bad. The situation is really bad. So it's kind of like a kid falling off the bicycle. The situation, I was just talking with my son's girlfriend. I was telling him how it was, we were going into a holiday, and one of my sons is very prone to accidents, and he was using a power drill, God bless him, and he just kind of drilled through his hand, and yeah, it was that. It was right during the first lockdown, and we were all locked in our houses, and I was like, "Woo, I get to get out. We're going to the hospital." So anyway, so the point is, when your kid drills his hand, you have to go ahead and put a bandage on it and get stitches in it. But if let's say we were so locked down, they didn't let us go to the emergency room, and I just bandaged it, that would have turned into a horrifying wound with infection and all that. So that really is a very direct correlation with the pills. You're calming a wound, you're putting the bandage on it, you're putting a little bit of ointment on it. Okay, great. If we rely on that, then we're harming the person taking it. But if we use it that way, we take it for a couple of weeks, couple of months before tests, when a person gets very anxious, maybe they don't test well and they're super anxious. If we're using it in that way, it's a great Band-Aid. If we're using it to solve the problem, we just caused a terrible infection.
That's a very, very good analogy. Yeah. Yeah, because it's like every time my doctor like asked me about the medication and stuff. I was like, yeah, I mean, the medication is good. The dose is good. But if I don't sleep, if I don't eat, if I'm not doing all the other things, like the medication is only going to do so much for me. So it's like the more I take, it's not going to help if everything else is wrong, you know?
Exactly.
That's what I've learned, which I'm glad I've learned that. And I've like went down on my doses for that reason. But another question we got that I thought was very interesting, and I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on this, but what are your thoughts on psychedelic therapy for ADD and ADHD?
So I've been getting, well, like psilocybin kind of stuff, like mushrooms and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I have been getting a lot of good feedback on CBD. I know that's not psychedelics, but a lot of parents have been writing in that they get like a really good, pure, high quality CBD, and their kids are doing great on it. So that's certainly worth looking at. It's you know it's not something that's addictive, and it doesn't give you a high, and it can and I use it sometimes. I have some CBD here, and I use it sometimes for my kids if they have a headache or they're not feeling great. So sometimes CBD will just take the edge off, and then let them have a nap or something like that. So that's definitely something I've heard about. I have heard about starting to use this kind of the mushrooms for that, and I don't know enough about it to say if I like it or not yet. But the CBD for sure, and I've also spoken to people who actually smoke the full pot, and they say that really does great for them. I'm obviously not recommending that for children.
That's funny. I mean, CBD, yeah, I didn't even think about that for ADD. I use CBD when I have trouble sleeping, and I've been having a lot of skin issues, and that's the only thing that helps me like sleep through the night.
You need magnesium.
Okay. I'm gonna ask my doctor about that next week.
No, you just go get it. You just go ahead and get it.
Okay, I will.
Just pick it up at the pharmacy.
Okay.
It's not expensive even.
Do you recommend like magnesium glycinate or glycinate or a specific type?
I've been recommending citrate.
Citrate?
Yeah. And usually it's best absorbed if you take it with like a B complex, which anyway is good. Both of those water soluble. So that's why I'm saying you don't, I think people should ask their doctors about taking anything.
Yeah.
But since it's something that kind of washes out of your system, and it's really hard to overdose on magnesium and B vitamins. So I don't worry about that too much. And if you're having sleep issues and skin issues, that's like your body calling out, give me some magnesium. Or you could make it even easier. Melissa, you really like this. Take an Epsom salt bath every night. That'll do the trick too.
I was doing Epsom salts. I had to stop because the baths were bothering my skin. It's like
The Epsom salts are bothering your skin?
It was like Epsom salts and oatmeal baths, and they were good for a while until they weren't. And my body, and I also, now my new apartment doesn't actually have a bathtub, which is sad. So yeah, my doctor's asked me about this the other day, but yeah, I've been working with an applied kinesiologist, and we've cut out a lot of things and doing a lot of different supplementation. So we've been on like this rotation. For me, I've done like certain B vitamins, but I've learned I can't take B12 unless it's like unmethylated or whatever, because the methyl B, so but the magnesium I'm definitely going to try, and I'm definitely going to look into the micronutrients you were talking about.
Yes.
Now, Melissa, you can also do like a foot soak of Epsom salts. Get like a little like bucket. That's what I do, and I just put my feet in during the work day if I don't have time for a bath. Yeah.
And you get a good dose of magnesium. And they also have magnesium oil that you just spray on your skin. And it absorbs nicely.
You can put them in your socks and put your socks on. I've done that too.
You just have great ideas.
Yeah.
I am a nutritionist, so I do recommend these things to people.
Yeah. I should just be listening and not talking, because you know this stuff.
No, I do not know what you know. I do not know what you know. When we get into supplement territory, that's where I can chime in, but I do not know all these things that you've been sharing today. By no means.
Okay, I'm glad we could share then.
I selfishly love this conversation. I'm learning a lot of new tips too. All righty.
Okay, but oh yeah, Melissa, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think you answered most of my questions for now, so I'm gonna need to think if there's any more. Kath, do you have any?
Yeah, I just had one that it popped up when I was, like I said, I had a couple that when I was listening again, I was like, oh, I wish I would have asked her this question. But I feel like it really is on theme to what we've been talking about today, of when you were saying that you give that emotional or that spiritual support to your clients. And I was just thinking about when you were talking about in the episode about the people who have been cursed and how they've been carrying this weight with them for so long, and how they've been labeled and put in boxes and think that they're bad at something or can't achieve something. And it just like was really making me sad yesterday. And I was like, I'm glad I'm about to talk to her, because I was just wondering, like, how do you emotionally support people who have been impacted by years of comments from classmates, teachers, family members, whoever, about their ADD and ADHD symptoms, and like what that means about them as a person, instead of just like a symptom that they're having? Like, how do you support them?
I got such a wonderful WhatsApp this morning from someone I've been working with for a while, and she wrote, "Thank you for reintroducing me to me." And it just made my day, because that's a lot of the work I do, is bring the person back to themselves. What happens when you're cursed with being told you're all these things is that you're always outwardly facing, you're always responding to everyone around you instead of even knowing who you are. You no longer take up space. It's about what this person thinks and how this person's gonna judge, and how I'm going to be perceived by everyone around me. So the work I do is just bring someone back to themselves, and say, what do you love about you? What are you proud about you? And part of that is, so they, once they get, like, they kind of fall in love with themselves again, as though they're nurturing themselves as that little child that deserves love no matter what, because you exist. You're special because you're here, and you were chosen to be here, and God doesn't make mistakes. So you're here, and God doesn't make junk. So therefore, there's a reason you're on this planet, and it's because of your unique combination of self that makes you special and important. And once you're that, you can also say, okay, everybody makes mistakes. And when I've been impulsive, that's just, I'm already good. I'm a good person, and good people also get impulsive. And now I don't have to self-protect. I can say, oops, sorry about that. And I could even learn from it for the next time. But if I don't exist, and I only exist based on the mirror of what everyone else thinks of me, or I think everyone else thinks of me, then I can never absorb and learn and make progress. But the progress can be made, and I really do spell it out in the first few chapters of book 1 of HyperHealing, that we really have to take that journey back to ourselves before we could continue on. Because I can give a person 100 charts. I could be here for you and make sure that you're getting your things done every day. And you can learn some skill, but it'll never stick until you're a person who you love. And because you're doing it for you, because you're worth it, and because you want to.
I love that. That was so inspirational.
Thank you.
I love that.
I
Yeah.
love my work. I love my work because people take incredible journeys back to themselves, and they're such an inspiration to me.
Yeah, no, and I feel like it's such like unique work, and I think the world needs more of it, because I feel like a lot of people don't specialize in ADD and ADHD and like managing all these symptoms. It's just like, oh, what pharma does and prescribes medication, and it's like, okay, now you got to deal with it the rest of your life. But it's
Right.
nice to know there's other options, and people are normal even if they have that diagnosis.
Exactly.
All righty.
So how can they find you? How can they work with you? How can we send people your way?
Well, the best way to get in touch with me is through my website, and that's hyperhealing.org. And people can book a consultation with me, a free consultation, where I'll hear their story and I'll give them a little bit of guidance. Obviously, in 15 minutes, we can't solve the problem. I had a client yesterday. He came in for an hour, And at the end of the hour, he says, but we still didn't address the anxiety and this. I says, yes, it's been an hour. You know, you've been developing all of these life story things for 40 years. So you gotta give me at least an hour and a half to unravel all of it. So 15 minutes is definitely not enough, but definitely that could help a person get a direction. I could tell pretty quickly, oh, maybe it's worthwhile for you to do a diet, or maybe for you, we need to work on this skill or that skill. So I'm always happy to meet new people and hear their story. And people can also, through that book consultations, I have a great quiz on my website, which gives people a lot of insight into what's causing their ADHD symptoms. And people really enjoy the quiz because I offer a lot of good information. And you also, on the website, again, hyperhealing.org, you could download a free ebook, which is all of the cheat sheets. It's basically a summary of the first book. And it also gives a lot of good information.
Well, thank you very much for all of this. And hopefully you'll be getting more clients from this. And I know I will be working with you in the future. So
Looking forward to it.
Reach out about that. Yeah, thank you. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you both so much. I really enjoyed you. You guys are amazing. And the interview, I loved both of you. And I love you even more now. You're just putting out such great light into the world and helping people, and you're so positive. So I'm just hoping that your podcast takes off, your work takes off, and that you're very successful, because you're going at this with such a big heart. And I hope the world receives that well from you.
Hey, you're putting it out there. Manifest it for us, please.
Yes.
I'll do it.
Thank
In
you
my
so
opinion,
much.
all you have to open the channels, and the universe responds, and you're doing just that, and you're helping people, which is just beautiful.
Thank you. Thanks for recognizing it. Thank you for being here. And thank you for all the work that you do. We're so inspired by you. I probably am going to listen to your episode again by the end of this week, because so many nuggets of wisdom. We appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thank you.